Welcome to Soccer Morning on World Soccer Talk. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome into Soccer Morning, the final show. Does not mean Soccer Morning is ending, but as I've said a couple times this week, just to give you just a heads up, our partnership with World Soccer Talk ends as of today, the final weekday in the month of January. We'll be looking ahead into the future. Don't know quite what's there yet, but we'll be charging ahead. So don't go anywhere. Join us again on Monday. But here today, show big stuff happening. Ross Dunbar from DW Sport will join us. We'll talk Bundesliga with our good friend Ross. Lots to talk about there, including the ongoing saga with Pep Guardiola, whether or not he's going to finish out his final season with Bayern Munich with both a league title and a champion. Perhaps some talk about Jurgen Klopp maybe poaching some talent from Germany for his project at Liverpool, the state of the Bundesliga season as it exists. Of course, we know Bayern is running away with the thing, but there's always intrigue in Germany. We'll go up and down the table with Ross and take a look at all of that. So Ross coming up just a couple of minutes here of Soccer Morning. We do have a lot of news to get to, so why don't we do that ahead of Ross's appearance. First up, Mexico head coach Juan Carlos Osorio has decided to clarify his comments on MLS. Remember, he said that no player in his prime should be signing with MLS. They should be playing in Europe. This came out in a story a couple of days ago. Ives Gullersepp of Goal.com tracked down Juan Carlos Osorio. And of course, the former head coach of the New York Red Bulls, the Chicago Fire in MLS, he said, "I did say that for any player, the ultimate goal, especially at their peak, should be playing in Europe. This goes for any league in the Americas, whether it's MLS, the Mexican League, Brazilian League, Argentinian League, or any other. I have never said that I won't call players from MLS. Any suggestion of that idea is false. I would never ignore a player because of the league they play in." I don't know exactly why Juan Carlos decided he needed to back off a little bit. Of course, I suppose it's a matter of not shutting down any options. He doesn't, and I suppose that, he may have gotten a phone call or two, and he certainly got some connections back in MLS from his days there. But regardless, here we go again. It's the same story as we've seen with Jurgen Klinsmann, only in this case, of course, Juan Carlos Osorio has no particular pressure to support MLS. That's not the league, the domestic league of his national team that he's coaching. But like Jurgen Klinsmann, he has sort of thrown his own league into a mix of leagues as he pushes players to Europe. The national team head coach pushing players to Europe, not that controversial in the end. It's just a matter of how people take this, and of course, the powers that be, how they respond. U.S. men's national team midfielder Jermaine Jones has lashed out against his MLS suspension, calling it crazy. His New England Revolution contract offer, calling it a joke. Jones was suspended for 6 games by MLS after he made contact with referee Mark Geiger in the second leg of New England's playoff series with DC United last year. It was the final game of the Revolution season as they lost that series, and meant that Jermaine Jones cannot play for the first 6 games of the new season or the first 6 games of his new contract wherever he happens to sign because of the other leagues honoring the MLS suspension. He says the suspension is preventing him from taking good offers abroad. And he's also, again, he's called the contract offer from the Revolution a joke. We don't know exactly what that is. Clearly, he was overpaid by MLS standards, although how much he's worth at this point in his career is definitely in the eye of the beholder. He made them a better team. He has previously said he'd take a pay cut from the Revolution if it meant a longer-term deal. He wants some stability there with the Revs. This is a saga that will play out over the next couple of weeks, I imagine. I actually think that Jermaine Jones probably won't end up being a Revolution player in 2016. Former Manchester United captain Nemanja Vidic has retired at the age of 34. Vidic appeared over 200 times for Manchester United in his 9 years with the club. His contract with Inter Milan was canceled by mutual consent after the Serbian was sidelined with a hernia operation, so he hasn't been able to play for some time. I saw the writing on the wall. There was some rumors that he might make the jump to MLS, but it seems as though maybe fitness is his major concern at this point. If he can't get back to full health, then he's certainly not worth signing by an MLS club. He won 5 Premier League titles and 1 Champions League title with United during his time there. He also Spent time in Russia, and obviously this last stint with Inter Milan. Quite the defender at his height, but a guy who took a precipitous drop over the last couple of seasons. Very much like another player who used to be in England that ended up in Italy that just signed with MLS, but I'll put that aside for another time. The U.S. men's national team hits the field for the first time in 2016 on Sunday against Iceland in Carson, California at the StubHub Center. Klinsmann's low-key camp and a mix of veterans and youth make it hard to know what to expect from the Americans on Sunday. We'll be watching for a certain number of players to maybe make a mark. If you've seen the level players like, say, Darlington Nagbe, Mix Diskerud, maybe the creative element in the absence of people like Clint Dempsey, maybe they can establish themselves a little bit more in Klinsmann's thinking going forward. You've got March qualifiers. You've got Copa America 2016 happening this summer in the United States, a big tournament there. Lots of opportunity. What we learn in a friendly against a weak Iceland side, because this is not Iceland's best squad, this is not a FIFA window, is in the, it's a subjective thing. We'll see if Klinsmann gets anything out of this. The U23 contingent, including Matt Polster, Kellen Acosta, Tim Parker, Eric Miller, Brandon Vincent, Will Trapp, they're all working towards a March showdown with Colombia for a spot in the 2016 Olympics down in Brazil. That's a tournament that would definitely help the U.S. program and the U23s. We'll see if these players can do something over the course of these two games, Iceland and then Canada, to maybe show whether or not Andy Herzog's got enough to get the job done against Colombia. Just a side on that, Stephen Goff of the Washington Post reporting that originally the plan was to play the home leg against Colombia at Avaya Stadium in San Jose. That has fallen through. Right now, the Federation is looking at Toyota Stadium in Frisco, Texas, home of FC Dallas, as a potential site of that game against Colombia. I hope if we can get this settled and they can promote that game, I hope the United States could sell out Frisco, Toyota Stadium, for a game against Colombia for a chance to go to the Olympics. Is that possible, or is that a dream that's not going to happen? Anyway, weekend games coming up. England heads into an FA Cup fourth round weekend with Derby County hosting Manchester United, Palace hosting Stoke, Liverpool hosting West Ham, fresh off their League Cup semi-final triumph. Other games include League One side Colchester hosting Tottenham, League Two's Carlisle hosting Everton, Reading hosting League One side Walsall. A bunch of interesting matchups in the FA Cup fourth round. 14 Premier League sides still remain in the tournament. In Spain, Barcelona plays host to Atleti. Massive showdown of two of the top teams in the league, the top two teams in the league. Meanwhile, Real Madrid hosts Espanyol as they attempt to get back on the right side of things with Zinedine Zidane in charge. Juve looking to continue their streak of 11 straight wins in Serie A, away to Chievo Verona. A bunch of other games of interest in Italy as well. You've got German games coming up, of course. We're going to talk to Russ Dunbar momentarily. The game today, Mainz versus Mönchengladbach. You do have Bayern Munich on Sunday against Hoffenheim. Werder Bremen in the news in the American soccer scene. Maybe not because of any Americans playing there, as Aaron Johansson still tries to get healthy. But they're hosting Hertha Berlin, which is the home of another American, John Brooks. There you go. Let's take a break. We'll come back. We will talk to Ross Dunbar from DW Sports about all things German football in just a moment. It is Soccer Morning, the last time on WorldSoccerTalk.com. Be right back.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on World Soccer Talk with Jason Davis.
All right, we're back on a Friday edition of Soccer Morning. Seems like as good a day as any to talk some German football with our friend Ross Dunbar. You can find him on Twitter at Ross Dunbar93. He works for DW Sports and Fox Soccer as well. Hi, Ross. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing well. If I say Friday's a good day to talk Bundesliga, partly because they have a Friday game, so we can certainly talk about what's coming up today, but look ahead to the rest of the weekend as well. But I think there are a couple of other intriguing stories coming out of Germany. You just tipped me to one right before we came on the air, and that's the situation of Bayern Munich. Obviously we know Pep Guardiola has already said he's leaving in the summer. This is a club that doesn't do calm very well, despite the fact that they're dominating the league and they expect to win everything. What's the situation right now, Bayern Munich, as we understand it?
So last week, obviously, Bayern Munich narrowly beat Hamburg to kick off the second half of the season. But the big story from that day was the injury to Jerome Boateng. He's obviously going to be out for 3 months now at such a crucial point in the season. And anyone I think who's watched Bayern will know that Boateng is the cornerstone of that team. He defensively he's outstanding. His passing ability is brilliant. And again, what it brings into the limelight is what's going on at Bayern's training ground, because he's the 14th player this year to have a soft tissue injury. Now that doesn't happen out of bad luck. That happens maybe through too much demand on the players and whatnot. Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, the chief executive, came out after the game and blamed the German FA for this, which I don't really understand how the two are linked. But it seemed that he was trying to deflect it away from the criticism on Pep Guardiola at the moment, and there's been a lot of scrutiny as to whether Guardiola is asking too much of his players. Obviously, last year there was the fallout between Guardiola and the long-serving club doctor, Dr. Müller Wohlfahrt. He left in April last year. Apparently there was a lot of friction between the two, especially around the treatment of Thiago, who went for private treatment rather than getting treated by the club doctor. So this has all been rumbling in the background, and on Thursday, Germany's kind of main sports magazine, Kicker, which comes out twice a week, published a story which suggested that the atmosphere at Bayern Munich certainly isn't very good at the moment. They talked about a club mole. We've heard this club mole before, apparently, coming out and giving us some insight, but it seems there's a little bit of friction towards Guardiola. There's been some public comments that would suggest that maybe the players weren't so happy with the fact that he announced his departure halfway through the season. So it really kind of, even though Bayern Munich are 8 points clear and we expect them to win the league, it really creates a very interesting narrative now going into the such an important part of the season, where you've got the Champions League coming back next month, you have the Boateng injury, you have the atmosphere in the camp, and I'm really interested to see how that pans out and whether maybe that will. I'm not saying they're going to collapse, but it might make them a little bit shakier.
There's so many layers there. I mean, certainly the Guardiola departure is the overarching connection between all of the. Because to me, I imagine that Pep Guardiola doesn't feel. His philosophy is his philosophy. It's not as though this is new for him, but I would imagine he doesn't really feel any responsibility to necessarily, put his keep his players fresh, considering he's trying to rush his way to a Bundesliga title, a Champions League title on his way out the door.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was, to me, that was the interesting message out of the press conference when he announced that he was going to leave. Was this is a guy who has got probably an era-defining 6 months ahead. I mean, whether you agree with it or not, he's going to be defined on what he does in the Champions League. And if you announce that you're leaving in 6 months, then it's really an easy stick to beat someone with. If things go wrong or go off the rails, it's very easy to go back to that and say, well, the manager or the head coach shouldn't be announcing 6 months before the end of the season that he's going to leave. And I kind of thought there was a bit of an arrogance about the whole press conference to announce that he was leaving as well. It seemed to be what you had maybe in the States with LeBron James announcing, "Oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that." It was all about Pep Guardiola, and it was a very interesting dynamic that Bayern Munich didn't seem to have the power. The power lay with Pep Guardiola, obviously, who we expect will go to England in the summer.
Yeah, and then he has to, in the aftermath of the press conference, he has to say things like, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to unsettle my English colleagues, etc., or my English-based colleagues," and he does, look. The world has done a wonderful job of building up Pep Guardiola's ego. And I'm sure he had a pretty vibrant ego to begin with. But since the move from Barcelona to Bayern Munich, it's been about him, and for that club, for FC Hollywood, to be so about one guy, to be about the manager that way, I imagine it's ruffling some feathers. I mean, I don't know what else to add to this, Ross. You can tell me, how does Bayern Munich get their ship righted before he leaves or as soon as he does leave? And I imagine we're going to see a sort of reactionary appointment after this, someone who's going to be a lot less focused on the spotlight than Pep Guardiola.
Yeah. So we call Ancelotti in the summer. So
right.
exactly that. Basically, the ever diplomatic Carlo Ancelotti, who's worked under Berlusconi and Florentino Perez and these guys. You're right. I mean, I get the impression that this is a very German thing, that one guy coming out and having the ego and having the power. I'm not really sure that would sit well with Bayern Munich. This massive institution that for so long has been run by the core of the club. Rummenigge, Hoeneß, Beckenbauer. These guys are Bayern Munich through and through. And then obviously if Guardiola comes in and he has this ego, it might ruffle a few feathers. I think what will be really important is how the players respond to that. I certainly don't think guys like Philipp Lahm and Thomas Müller and Manuel Neuer will have any problems. I'm sure these guys are professional enough to get the job done. But when you have guys maybe like Frank Ribéry coming back from injury and Mehdi Benatia and Mario Götze, all of whom might not even be in the starting 11, that might become a problem. If you have players who maybe aren't playing, maybe Arjen Robben perhaps doesn't play enough, or maybe Lewandowski, who apparently has been linked with a move to Real Madrid. If all of these dynamics work at the same time, you may have a situation where the atmosphere in the camp continues to be, certainly, as they described it, not good going into the Champions League knockout stages.
Yeah. I certainly understand the desire to pin this on Guardiola or whatever, but in a larger sense, Ross, what do you make of the injury situation at Bayern Munich? I mean, certainly this has been something that's been thrown at Arsene Wenger at Arsenal as well. Maybe the training staff isn't good enough, or it's doing the wrong things. Maybe the manager is running the players ragged. But it seems to me that there's a bigger question about players in a modern football context, and maybe the rigors of the game, and these, as you said, soft tissue injuries becoming so prevalent at this point that it bears a reassessment maybe of how players are being brought through and how they're being used.
Yeah, it's a fascinating discussion. I mean, there was a fantastic analysis on the website Spielverlagerung, which is basically a tactical analysis website in German, and it was looking at the theory behind what they call periodization when it comes to coaching. Making sure that you're not overloading the players when it comes to training sessions and whatnot, and obviously working it around such an intense schedule. I mean, I think what's also interesting, even though this has been rumbling on for so long, is that Bayern Munich have just come off a 5-week winter break, and there's been a little bit of scrutiny over actually what Bayern were doing in Doha, because the training sessions generally are open here in Germany, so generally, if you're a journalist, you can go along and actually see what's going on. But in Doha, I believe there was only like 2 training sessions out of maybe 10 days of practice that were open to the public, so you couldn't really get an idea as to what was actually going on. And I read some comments in the German media that even suggested some of the German players at Bayern Munich were a little bit overweight coming back from the Middle East. So, I mean, it's such an interesting dynamic. And as you say, I mean, I think this is now being realised as an issue that can be dealt with. I mean, generally in the past we've said, okay, injuries are sometimes down to bad luck, sometimes down to tackles, but I think there's now an acceptance that muscle strains and soft tissue injuries can be dealt with, and it's now the responsibility of the coach and the management to deal with that.
Very, very interesting. Now, obviously, Bayern Munich is the power in the Bundesliga. There are obviously big clubs within that league, although they're not going to chase down. We don't expect them to chase down Bayern Munich for the league title. Certainly, they rate in the European context, and this brings me to some recent comments before we get into the league itself, Ross, from Christian Seifert, who's the CEO of the Bundesliga. This is the return of the Super League discussion, the return of turning the Champions League into something that is more akin to a full league with a full season. I haven't read through all of these comments. This stuff has come up in the past. I guess it's interesting, but it seems as though German executives are want to talk about this stuff more than anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a little bit of a paradox there, because you'd expect German officials and executives to maybe brush this kind of thing off and say, okay, we're not going to buy into this pressure from England to have this European Super League. But in the last few days, it's been Karl-Heinz Rummenigge and Christian Seifert, the CEO of the Bundesliga, who have almost opened the door to this discussion. I listened to the press conference with Gianni Infantino last week, and he said exactly the same thing. They would open the door to the discussion. But I'm still not sure how this is actually going to work. I mean, in the past, this debate about a European League has been rumbling on for so long. You go back 10, 15 years, and the idea was that they'd have a European League of the big teams in smaller countries in Europe. So, for example, you get maybe the top 2 teams from Scotland, the top 2 teams from Holland, from Portugal, from Belgium, and they would have their own European Super League. But now it seems the dynamics seem to have changed. You now have a situation where the clubs who are being suggested now are Bayern Munich, PSG, Manchester United, Arsenal, Chelsea. So I'm not really too sure how this is actually going to play out. I mean, if you're an English club and you've just signed this massive TV contract with Sky, I mean, is it in your interest to have a European Super League? Would it alienate domestic supporters?
Right.
Would it just I don't really know how that's going to play out. And when you see things like La Liga playing matches at 11 o'clock in the morning just to suit TV audiences in China, I'm a little bit skeptical as to what the actual kind of information is here.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, obviously the practical application of any Super League plan is interesting. I mean, basically what you outlined is the Deloitte Money League being called, being pulled into a Super League situation, and you fundamentally alter the structure of European football from top to bottom if you do this, and I wonder what this would mean if they ever got to this point where it's the Bayern Munich, the PSG, certainly the money teams, what it would mean for some of these other clubs, the mid-table to bottom half clubs in every top league in your situation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you can make some comparisons to the the NFL and systems like that you have in the States, where you can essentially move franchises to different markets. I mean, obviously with this Los Angeles Rams things, the franchise was moved to LA, obviously because it's a bigger market and there's more commercial interest there. Where would you draw the line? I mean, if you look at the Deloitte Money League, there are so many English Premier League clubs now in the top 20. Would you have the whole Premier League being part of the European Super League? I mean, take a team like West Ham, for example. West Ham is a fairly, average-sized club when it comes to European standards, but, they play in London, they have an Olympic Stadium, they have a rich owner. Does that mean that they're entitled to be in the European Super League over, say, maybe Marseille or Lyon in France or Ajax? I don't know. I don't know how this is going to be done. And then you have the question, would you have promotion relegation? If you're a team like Lyon or those teams I mentioned, and you all of a sudden become relegation fodder in a European Super League, would you not become a little bit more disgruntled? Okay, we would much rather be part of Ligue 1 where we were winning most of the time. Right. So I don't really know how this is going to play out, but unfortunately, I think now more than ever it seems closer.
Yeah, look, there certainly is a movement, and I know a lot of European football fans will put this at the feet of the Americans because of the influence of the big money NFL and certainly the way that MLS has done things in terms of closing shop and protecting big clubs from having to worry about things like relegation. I mean, we've seen with Chelsea, it's not impossible that a big club be pulled into that kind of into that kind of scrap. And if Chelsea's in a closed Super League situation, they don't have to worry about it. Now, maybe they're a bottom of the table finish is a disaster for them, or maybe not, because it's fundamentally a different kind of operation now. There's so many ramifications to this that it's almost not worth talking about because we don't know what kind of form it would take. If you had to guess, and you said we're moving again towards this, or at least it seems as though there's some momentum here. The Germans, Seifert, Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, who else? I mean, who else would need to be involved here? We're talking, we're obviously talking Real Madrid, Barcelona. We're talking about the big Premier League sides. We're talking about, the Premier League's executives saying outwardly that they would welcome this idea for their top teams because they don't want to lose those clubs, especially when they got the Sky deal.
Yeah, sure, but I mean, if you take into account the kind of main super clubs in Europe, your Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Manchester United, and PSG possibly. You have only 5 teams. I mean, what do you do after that? Do you bring in Tottenham and teams like that? I mean, I'm not, no disrespect to Tottenham, but I mean, they've not won anything for so long. I mean, are they being classed as being an elite team in Europe? I really don't know how it's going to work. I mean, if I was going to guess at how it was going to pan out, I could imagine a situation where you have a bit like this International Champions Cup pre-season tournament that's been taking place in the last few years. You've had 4 or 5 teams playing intense kind of round-robin fixtures in different cities around the world. So, for example, you maybe would have, Real Madrid playing Manchester United in, I don't know, New York, or you'd have Barcelona against PSG in Shanghai. I get the impression that's what might happen.
Well, but that fundamentally messes with the structure. Look, I'm a pretty traditional guy, Ross, so I find change kind of scary on that front, even if it's exciting on one level, and I understand, from a business perspective, why they would want to do this. So are you going to replace your league matches with a Super League match that takes place in Shanghai? I mean, that's so fundamentally different in terms of how we play the game. And right now, it pretty much, you could argue there's a bubble even. It seems as though there's plenty of money to go around for some of these big clubs. There's plenty of oil money to back PSG and Manchester City and some of these clubs. Why is this necessary? Why that? I mean, that's the fundamental question, right? Why is it necessary?
Well, it's probably capitalism, isn't it? You just want to make more and more profits, isn't it? I mean, all of these clubs will be owned by. I mean, if you look at it now, I mean, the influence that certainly Qatar has on a lot of big clubs in Europe, and now the ever increasing influence that you have in China. I mean, this is how it's panning out. But I mean, what would be interesting to me is, I mean, would you keep a league format? I mean, that's probably the fundamental difference between maybe the NFL and European leagues, is that we play this over 38 games. It's not played over playoffs and conferences and stuff like that. Maybe that's the future of the European Super League.
Oh yeah, breaking it out into geographical conferences and having teams make playoffs. Wow, that's so that's kind of weird. I mean, I imagine lawsuits. I mean, that's what I imagine. Like, if something like this was being put into place, I imagine not only lawsuits from teams that have really no shout, but may say you're affecting our ability to make money and compete if you take Manchester United out of the Premier League, for example. Or, I mean, again, if this is replacing their domestic league on their schedule, or lawsuits between clubs. I mean, if Celtic gets left out at the because Tottenham's in, or Galatasaray gets left out, or there's going to be lawsuits, right?
You would imagine so, and I mean, also if you're Richard Scudamore, chief executive of the Premier League, and you've just signed this massive multi-billion-pound contract with Sky, I would imagine there's going to be ramifications if Manchester United say, "Oh well, hold on, we're going to go and play in Shanghai against Barcelona for the rest of the season." Oh yeah,
Sky's not going to be too happy about that. NBC over here won't be too happy about that. There are people with clout and lawyers who would have a fit. Now, if they managed to figure out how UEFA or whoever's running this thing decides that, or the ECA decides that they're going to mollify those interests somehow. I mean, that's possible too. I mean, certainly we've seen FIFA do it with numerous different things. All right, so we can have that discussion all day long. Let's look at the league again. You've got Bayern Munich at the top of the table. Pep Guardiola trying for a treble, I imagine. How seriously, just before we get to the league, how seriously is the cup campaign for Bayern Munich and for Pep? I mean, the Champions League is the target, and they're running away with the Bundesliga.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, I think the next 6 months will be kind of almost era defining for Guardiola. He has to obviously get Bayern Munich to the semi-finals. I think that's the bare minimum. But I think when it comes to his reign as coach, I think people will assess, whether he's won the European Cup. That will be the big kind of reflection, I think, in years to come. So really, with an 8-point lead, I mean, all Bayern really have to do now is kind of turn up, win games, and then do the business in the Champions League. But as I said in one of my pieces at the winter, the margin of error at that stage of the competition is so fine that I think it's a little bit unfair just to start pigeonholing, Guardiola's reign into one particular area. I mean, what will be interesting, I think, certainly from the league's point of view, is can Dortmund be consistent enough to, bite away at Bayern Munich? If Bayern Munich will inevitably drop points somewhere, and obviously the two teams have got to play each other again, and Bayern have still got to play Wolfsburg and Schalke and Leverkusen, teams who have the capability of taking points off them. I mean, I wonder whether Dortmund can be consistent enough to keep biting away, bring that points tally down, and maybe by the end of the season you might have a little bit of a title race, but it's unlikely.
Yeah, as you said, it's an 8-point gap right now. Bayern Munich top of the table. Dortmund 41 points, 8 points back, and then it's another 8 points to Hertha in third place. So you got some separation there. Things are kind of spreading out across the league. So when you look at the weekend schedule here, I mean, we just got games. I mean, is there anything that really stands out as potentially important to any of the races? Right? I mean, obviously, at the bottom of the table, you've got the relegation battle.
Yeah, I mean, I think this weekend there's not a huge amount of top games, but I mean, I think tonight you have Mainz against Borussia Mönchengladbach. That's an interesting game because last week none of the main contenders for a Champions League place actually won a game. So you have a situation where it's almost like the Premier League title where nobody wants to qualify for the Champions League. They're all dropping points right, left and centre. And tonight, Gladbach will be interesting to watch because they were really disappointing last week against Dortmund. And I think the wheels have come off a little bit for Andre Schubert. They lost a few games towards the end of the first half of the season. They lost 5-0 at Leverkusen, for example, where Hernandez scored a hat-trick for Leverkusen. And so, I mean, it'll be interesting to see whether they can pick that form back up again. Granit Xhaka is still suspended. They have a couple of other injuries. Jonas Hoffman, who one of the new signings, is injured as well. And they're going to a Mainz team who, is maybe 4 or 5 points behind Gladbach, in 8th or 9th place. So it shows you how competitive that area of the table actually is. And they will be boosted by the fact that Yunus Mali, their top goal scorer, won't be signing for Borussia Dortmund this year. There's talk of perhaps going to England in the summer, but that's a really interesting game, I think. And on Saturday night, you have Stuttgart against Hamburg, two big clubs in Germany. I believe that it's being broadcast on Fox free-to-air TV this weekend.
I think that's right. Yeah.
I think that'll be a game of particular interest, and obviously both teams, in the last few years have been relegation candidates, but now it seems to be that they are beginning to get back to a more stable way of competing. They're kind of mid-table clubs at the moment, and Stuttgart have picked up 8 points from the last 4 games. So that shows that there's been a massive improvement in their performances under the new coach Jurgen Kramny. So that game, I think, for me, will be quite interesting on Saturday.
You've got again third place from Hertha, as I mentioned, taking away to Werder Bremen, and Werder Bremen has been in the news here in the States for obvious reason, Ross. And not only did we have the Jordan Morris thing, Aaron Johansson is still there. I don't. Its recovery has been long enough that he sort of dipped off the radar. He's not part of the U.S. national team picture right now. At least, obviously, it's not a FIFA window as there's an American camp happening. So that's not really the issue. The issue is his injury. How long until we can expect to see Aaron Johansson on the field for Werder Bremen?
From what I read, during the winter break, I still think that there's at least a few weeks still to go. I mean, like you say, he's dropped off the radar quite substantially for the last few months. I think it's unfair to criticise the guy, obviously, if he's been out injured. And obviously, you mentioned there about the whole Jordan Morris debate. I mean, the kind of impression here in Germany was a little bit of bemusement. Actually, I don't think MLS is particularly popular here or particularly prominent, but. Sure. I think people expected him to, take the deal that was offered from Bremen.
Right. Yeah.
I think it was just like a sense of, Bremen have asked him, so he should accept it. I mean, I don't really have a big opinion on it either way personally. I mean, I understand Sounders is a big club and challenging for titles and things like that, so I can see why he would want to do that. But when a club like Werder Bremen, is offering you the chance to be probably a first-choice striker in the Bundesliga, I find that a little bit strange that you wouldn't take that offer.
Yeah, well, I mean, the debate over that decision has obviously been raging here for quite some time. It's being seen as a victory for MLS, clearly, but look, it's whatever's down, whatever is best for the player individually, and he was labeled, and this is the thing that, of course, that I worry might stick to him, because we do have in our history Landon Donovan's time at Leverkusen and the quote unquote failure there. He was labeled homesick by the CEO of Bremen, Thomas Eichen. Is that? I mean, do you think that that's sort of covering themselves because they were turned down by a player you would expect to take the offer, or do you really believe that that's his opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably business speak for exactly that. I think they'll be quite embarrassed to have lost out on him, especially given there was so much publicity about Morris being on trial, with the team during the winter training camp. I mean, they were tweeting pictures of him being there, and the English account obviously was quite prominent in that. But yeah, I mean, I found it quite interesting that Morris said that when he joined the Bremen training in Germany, he was already convinced that he wanted to sign for Sounders. I don't know why that would be the case. I mean, whether maybe he wasn't feel very welcome there. I don't know exactly what the real issue was, but that certainly I think the impression in Germany certainly is a little bit of confusion, because Bremen are a team obviously who are fighting against relegation, but obviously a huge club in that part of the country. But they don't have maybe reliable centre forwards. Claudio Pizarro is 37 years old.
Right.
Anthony Uja is probably the only kind of main forward they've got. So I mean, from what I can see, he would have been a pretty important player for them.
Very interesting because I think a lot of the discussion here revolved around the fact that he might not play, and that going to the Sounders was a better option for playing time for a 21-year-old just starting his professional career. And there was also some, I think, it was hard for us to believe, or a lot of Americans to believe, that a player turning pro at 21 would be good enough to walk into a Bundesliga team and maybe compete for minutes, Ross. But that speaks to, I think, as you said, Werder's situation, maybe certainly Jordan Morris's talent, and based on the way that Werder Bremen was publicizing his stint there, maybe some marketing elements too.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think there's an element to that as well. I mean, I'm sure they would have loved to have an American player in their ranks. I mean, you see how the Bundesliga or the DFL, the league is trying to market the league to North American audiences. It's very much about personalities. They're very much trying to sell guys like Chicharito and Fabian Johnson. These are the guys who will perhaps get Americans tuned in. But I mean, I was at the game against Germany, the USA against Germany, and I think he came off the bench from the last 15 minutes, and I thought he looked really good. I was very surprised that here's a guy who's playing collegiate football at Stanford and then hasn't started his professional career. But from what I can see, certainly he would have added something different to Bremen's team, and they don't have that in the moment. And from what I can see as well, they're obviously looking to try and add one or two more forward players before the end of the window.
Very interesting. Speaking of well, I tried to do to get myself into a transition there, and I failed mightily. But let's talk about Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool. First of all, I'd love to get your perspective on the German perspective on Klopp at Liverpool, especially with all of the publicity over his celebration against Norwich on the weekend and not watching the penalties, and just the character that Jurgen Klopp is, having been moved over to the English stage, and then also some of these rumors that perhaps he's looking to poach some talent out of the Bundesliga for his project.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of his character, I think everybody knew that he would be remarkably popular in England because, when he was at Borussia Dortmund, you remember the press conferences when they were playing against English teams, the English media would absolutely love him. I think he's obviously very refreshing personality in English football at the moment, and so I can understand why there's such a warmth to him. The lingering debate, I think, over Klopp's time at Borussia Dortmund was the fact that he didn't adapt the team in the last 18 months. Tactically, there's a massive question mark still over him. He plays obviously this high pressing, or what he calls full throttle football, but maybe there's a sense that he doesn't have the tactical acuity to adapt his team when that isn't working. What I find interesting is that even though pressing is such a fundamental component of the game, in English football you have such an intense speed to the game anyway. So I mean, does that not maybe render the high pressing system a little bit obsolete? Because every team is pressing, every team is challenging for the ball, and I think the biggest test for Klopp will be whether he can actually adapt this team into a side that has the ability to put their foot on the ball and to dominate games, a bit like what you see from Man City, at times under Pellegrini. I'm not really too sure if he has the talent to do that. I mean, I think it will be interesting to see what kind of players he brings in from Germany. The main rumor is Joel Matip from Schalke. He's a very a very powerful, quite technically good centre half. He's actually had a really good season, Matip, I think, for Schalke. Normally, there was always a question mark about his concentration. He was that kind of defender who would switch off at important moments, but he's had a good season, and obviously his contract runs out at the end of the season, and I think that, to me, that looks like quite an almost kind of nailed-on transfer. I think that looks like it's going to happen. You have also Neven Subotic from Borussia Dortmund, player Klopp worked with, both at Dortmund and at Mainz. Subotic is not part of Thomas Tuchel's plans at the moment, so I certainly wouldn't rule that one out either. And obviously, if you can get two centre-halves of that quality, I think that has to add something to his team. I'm interested to see maybe whether he dips in for maybe a midfield type player, maybe someone like Sebastian Rode at Bayern Munich, who maybe isn't playing regularly, but would be the type of player I think who would certainly suit Klopp's style of play. So, I mean, I think there's certainly value for English clubs here. I mean, if you look at the figures, you've seen that Newcastle United have spent more money than the Bundesliga combined. So they obviously can have the pick of the talent if they want it.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. By the way, it's stunning to me that Subotic is still only 27 years old after everything we went through with him over here. Anyway, Ross Dunbar 93 on Twitter. Make sure you're following him, especially for updates on everything German football, but also beyond. Ross, appreciate the time as always. Brilliant chat, and I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me, guys. Cheers.
There goes Ross. Let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll open up the phone lines. Talk to you on a Friday. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, WorldSoccerTalk.com.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on World Soccer Talk with Jason Davis.
Back on Soccer Morning. Serious. Man, Friday. It's a Friday. WorldSoccerTalk.com for the last time. .com for all things Soccer Morning. That's just the way to go. You're probably already subscribed to an iTunes feed. Don't worry about that. You're probably good there. If it's the backheel.com Soccer Morning only feed. If you subscribe to us through the WorldSoccerTalk.com feed, you're going to have to change. I think that's right. I don't want to confuse anybody. Just go to backheel.com, okay? And if you end up subscribing twice, whatever. At least you've got us. All right? Every day. Right here. Yeah. Backheel.com/live as well, if you want to listen, watch or listen to the live show. And the YouTube channel directly there should be a thing. Should work. 646-832-3909 is your phone number. There is a couple of things we can talk about here this morning. Of course, looking ahead to an FA Cup weekend, I've got my man Robert out in L.A. asking me for an FA Cup upset, for a cup set. I hate that word so much. An FA Cup set. Not fun. I don't have any idea about how good Colchester, Bury, Oxford, Carlisle, Reading, and Walsall, Shrewsbury. I don't have any idea how good those teams are. None whatsoever. But if I'm going to pick an upset, I'm going to pick MK Dons beating Chelsea. just because. Because MK Dons fascinates me. I am, look, as an American who grew up in an American sports context before MLS was ever a thing, before soccer was really a major part, professional soccer was a major part of what we talked about week to week in sports. The idea that a club could move or a team could move from one city to another, it offended me. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't something I liked. Didn't like that, the Browns left Cleveland. I didn't like that. Who else relocated during my youth? The Arizona Cardinals became a thing when I was like 7 or 8 years old because they had been in St. Louis previous to that. I'm trying to think of, obviously we have recently, there's some recent history, but MK Dons, the only English club to have moved from one locale to another, having moved from Wimbledon to Milton Keynes. Again, fascinating. And I'm not, what I'm saying is I'm not quite as offended as the English typically are by the very existence of MK Dons. It's not that I root for MK Dons. And trust me, I understand that Wimbledon got screwed out of their team. But, it's still fascinating to see if MK Dons can do anything. If MK Dons ever made it to the Premier League, I'm pretty sure we'd have mass riots across the country, across England. I'm guessing. I don't know. So that's the way they act sometimes. So I'll take MK Dons over Chelsea. All right. 646-832-3909 is your phone number. We can also throw Freddie Adu out into this mix because Freddie has recently done an interview with Ives Gullersep that showed up at goal.com. In said interview, Freddie, okay, there's a couple of things here. One, good for Freddie. If this is the way Freddie feels, he needs to approach his career in order to get things going. And I don't want to have the argument about his age. He says he's 26. We're just going to go with that for now, okay? Because it's the simplest way to go. I'd rather than get bogged down into an argument about how old Freddie Adu actually is, because I know your Freddie Adu birthers out there. You love to go hard on this. It's over. Let it go. Okay? Maybe he's not 26, but let it go. Freddie Adu has some years left. That's the way he's painting this picture. And of course, having been hyped up at the age of 14 years old to the point of just insanity. Some excuses to be made if he wants to use them. But he's also while he's saying, yes, of course, being 14 years old and having all this heaped upon me, I didn't ask to be called the next Pele. Of course, that was too much. But it doesn't mean that I haven't made many, many mistakes throughout the years. Just a couple of choice quotes here, again, from Ives' piece over at goal.com. I'm not going to lie, that stuff bothers me. It hurts when he talks about people calling him a failure. I'm only 26. Yes, I've had some tough times in my career. I've had some great times as well. In the end, I can't control what people say. It wasn't my choice or decision to be compared to Pele when I came into the league. And I maintain, though, the most fascinating possible 30 for 30 or sports documentary that can be made about American soccer right now is a full examination of what happened in 2004 around Freddie Adu. And I'm just talking about just that year, or just that period, that brief period of time when Freddie Adu went from phenomenally talented youngster playing in the DC Metro to the future of MLS, the savior of American soccer, the next Pele, and MLS's golden child. I want to know what happened there. I want to know who made decisions that ultimately put Freddie Adu on such a pedestal. I want to know who at Sierra Mist thought it was a good idea to put Freddie Adu in commercials with Pele at 14. Reportedly 14. Whatever. I want to know all that. I think it'd be amazing. Now, it may not happen until Freddie's retired, or it may not happen until the powers that be at the time are out of their same jobs that they have now, because, look, Don Garber was commissioner then, Don Garber's commissioner now. I think Don Garber probably has something to answer for when it comes to Freddie Adu. We might not get that until he's done as MLS commissioner. Freddie goes on to say things like, everything that I've been through and everything that hurt my career, I brought it on myself because I didn't dedicate enough time to it. You can say, oh, I had a lot early, or say whatever you want, but at the end of the day, we all need to grow up at some point, and that has just hit me all this offseason. It really did. Look, and here's the thing. If Freddie Adu had any other job, now he wouldn't be as famous, he wouldn't be as scrutinized, but if Freddie Adu had any other job, even whatever, if Freddie Adu had any other job and figured it out at 26, you all have that buddy in high school or college or in your 20s, maybe he was your roommate, maybe he was just a friend, who couldn't figure out his life at all in his 20s. Just didn't get it, didn't understand, just couldn't focus, went through job, really found himself. And then one day, maybe it clicked for him. I somebody very close to me for whom that's true. Couldn't figure it out. Just rolled through crappy job after crappy job until one day that he finally got himself together. Now, it took somebody else coming into his life, but he finally got himself together and said, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to commit myself to. And now it all worked. Maybe that's where Freddie Adu finally is at 26 years old. And again, I'm not going to begrudge him the opportunity to find himself. The unfortunate part of this, of course, is that it's a waste of all of that talent. And he's admitting to a waste of all of that talent. I've looked back on these past few years, and I've wasted a lot of time, wasted years of my career, just not dedicated the time I should have to the sport. That's time wasted. Lucky for me, I started so early that time wasted doesn't mean I'm 33 or 34, and it's too late for me. I'm only 26, and I can change and correct things I've done wrong, and that's why I'm focused on right now. Bo on Twitter, I still want to know how Adu regressed. It's not just that he didn't improve. He went from legit MLS All-Star to... Right. I mean, look, I think that I'm not a professional soccer player, Bo. I don't know exactly how this works, but I imagine that if you don't put in the effort, if you're not putting in the work, if you're not attempting to stay sharp, it's pretty easy to fall back and become a pretty average player. Let's talk to Bill up in New York. What's up, Bill?
Hey, Jason. I want to ask you about Ashley Cole. Do you ever remember a move coming into MLS that everybody was so unified in saying it was a bad move as this one?
Yeah. I think we've had a couple. I can't pull one out of my memory. I think maybe Danielson at FC Dallas. Everybody knew that one was going to be a disaster. Just because he had already been a journeyman player, despite being a Brazilian World Cup winner. I beyond that, maybe I don't think I can remember any other where it was universal, like you say.
I'm almost thinking now, if this somehow works out, and I mean, the only reason why they're doing it, at least I think from most people's point of view, is to win the Champions League. If they win the Champions League and this guy ends up being a big part of LA winning it, this is probably the best move Bruce Arena's ever made. Because everybody's getting in his ear telling him not to do it, and he's doing it anyway.
Well, okay, yeah. I suppose it could be put on that level. I still think Bruce Arena's shining moments are taking players that people don't really rate anymore and having them become seriously strong contributors. Again, he made Dan Gargan into a near all-star in this league 2 years ago. That was not expected. He's turned Leonardo into a good defender when it looked like he was going to be a disaster. There have been opportunities for Bruce to prove his ability to find those diamonds. This isn't a diamond in the rough. This is a diamond that somebody threw on the side of the road. Maybe it's all dirty and he's trying to clean it up, but there's no guarantee he's getting it all off. So we'll see. We'll see. You're right in the sense that never before has everybody called out Bruce Arena on a move like this.
I haven't heard not one person say, even in the slightest, it's an okay move. Everybody's 100% against this move, how awful this is going to be.
I have seen a couple of people being contrarian on that front. There are a couple of writers out there who said this could be a good move for LA, but it's a very, very small percentage.
All right, I just wanted to get a call about that. And if I can throw one more thing with Jermaine Jones, it sounds like he's getting this whole situation with himself now, that he's going to have to just play for New England because there's no other offer out there for him. And that suspension at the end of last year was really coming back to hurt him big time. And it may hurt the U.S. national team. It's starting to look like more and more to me.
Well, yeah,
he's not going to be able to serve the suspension until he gets on the team.
What bothers me about this is he's whining about something that he brought on himself. You can't. Look, I know it was a handball. Okay, he has every right to beef. New England got screwed, etc., etc. You can't touch the referee, and Jermaine Jones knows that. So when you do what he did, not only are you going to get a red card, you're going to get a suspension. And as long as other leagues around the world are going to honor a suspension handed down by MLS, it's just his fault. I mean, it sucks. It's going to affect the national team if he's still a part of Jurgen Klinsmann's plans, but again, he did this to himself. What is he whining about? He calls the suspension crazy. Really, it's.
Oh, I definitely agree with you. But to see what is happening to this guy's career and how I'm really fearful that his U.S. national team career may be over if he doesn't resolve this quickly, because we're not going to use him 2 years from now. We're going to use him now. And it doesn't look like he's going to get this resolved in time to be able to take care and play for the U.S. national team.
We'll see. You're right. He may end up signing a pretty poor deal with New England. And if he's disgruntled, then, yeah, again, he brought that on himself. We'll see what happens, Bill. You got anything else?
No, that's it. Thanks, Jason.
All right, thanks a lot, Bill. Appreciate the call. Let's check in with Aaron up in Jersey. What's up, Aaron?
Hey, how you doing? Just a couple quick things. Actually, follow up on Jones and Dempsey, and it's really strange how some of these guys that are over 30, they played internationally. I mean, they like you said, they have no excuse. I mean, they're professionals. I mean, it's like a lawyer pushing a judge. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's just right. It's and you can't claim you're in mock trial because you're a professional. I just think they lose their heads, and it is a problem that we seem to have these kind of semi-stable over 30-year-old top national players. I mean, and it goes back a ways. I mean, it goes back to Lexi Lawler. I mean, it goes back a long time that something just happens with our guys, behaviorally, or they just don't like to kind of find that role. And I think a lot of it has to do with that. They wind up getting catered to so long that they really just don't seem to kind of be able to kind of slot that team role and just kind of do that final piece of their career.
You think that maybe Jermaine Jones, his head got a little big and he thought he was a little bit better than MLS?
I mean, better than MLS. I don't even know what that means as a player over 30 that has done well and he's done well all over. I mean, he hasn't had a superstar career. He's had a solid career, outside the U.S. and inside the U.S. I just think these guys wind up kind of getting, kind of almost sub-superstar in their own little pocket, because MLS is a bubble, in its own world. It doesn't have to really compete outside of its own world for, soccer in the U.S. when it comes to the U.S. And those players really aren't compared to European counterparts. Like if you're in Germany and you're next to Italy and there's Champions League, I mean, there's just so many layers going on. I mean, it's like working in New York City in some ways and working in Ohio. And that's not to slam Ohio. It's just to say that there's less density, and you sometimes just think you're better than you might really be. Okay. And you get to the back end of your career.
Well, yeah, that's the kind of that's the big fish, small pond kind of thing that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've seen that. You've seen it with Donovan. I mean, he got really weird in the end. Dempsey. I mean, Dempsey throw the the referee notebook. I mean, that was just strange. And obviously Jones, in a key moment on a team, fighting, to do something that stupid is really, kind of insane. I mean,
Wow.
But yeah. So, anyways, that was kind of one piece. The other one was really interesting is your interview earlier with with the gentleman Ross was the whole idea of these super clubs really need to have 3 teams within a team because they have to compete in their own domestic league, they have to compete at a Champions European level, and they kind of have to compete in all these side competitions, lower tier quality stuff, and handle injuries. And I just don't think the roster size, it's almost like an NFL issue. A 53-man roster doesn't work. Everyone knows it. It's killing these guys, and they don't care. It's kind of almost a similar thing happening with the modern roster of these big European clubs, where they just run out. I mean, they just run out of guys. These guys just get ground down, and they really don't have a way to kind of manage it. Whereas if you're a domestic competitor and you're not worrying about Europe, I mean, you're just fighting every week, and you've got your, you have your depth, especially in.
Well, I mean, it kind of puts into perspective all of those controversies we get sometimes, like when Arsenal goes into the FA Cup and puts out a quote unquote weak team, or has a league game following a Champions League week with an FA Cup game coming up midweek the following week and puts out a quote unquote weak team, and then we get that discussion in England about whether or not managers should be fined for their team selection. First of all, how insulting to the players that got selected for that game, but also. It's impossible. Like you said, it's nearly impossible. You get a group of elite players, and there's only so many elite players in the world, and we're already seeing a talent consolidation among the biggest clubs, and even they can't trot out Messi 60 times a year. I mean, he plays 60 games a year between club and country, and that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and if you're honest about how many did he really play, he probably played 45 of them hard the whole game, and the rest of them were kind of managed. If you really played him to the max, I mean, number one, if you played him to the max, he wouldn't be playing right now. I mean, the guy would have been ran into the ground in the last few years. And I mean, what I really think the way you deal with this is that if you get the champions, you get an extra couple player slots, maybe 2. And I don't mean to kind of blow it up and they get 40 players, and it turns into like the way college football got in the 80s, when, Oklahoma would have 150 players or something ridiculous like that. But you get maybe 2 extra players. And if you get to and to me this would be an interesting thing, is if you got to your cup, maybe quarterfinals, you make it an extra player. So you create kind of an incentive for the bigger clubs to keep playing hard through the kind of domestic cups. So it's a way to kind of, and of course they want that extra player not for the domestic cup, they really want it for Europe. But the point is that you give them a tool to kind of grow their roster by maybe 10%, which is probably all they need. I mean, they don't need 9 more players. They need 2, 3. I mean, if Bayern had 3 extra slots, I mean, I'm not saying losing a guy like Boateng is great, but I think they could manage more effectively, and maybe not even losing yet. Maybe they would have lost him a month from now because they would have managed him already, And so Bayern, I think it's all these top 10 to 20 clubs, which is the way it is. I mean, it's the football that everyone wants to see. Everyone wants to see Athletic Barcelona Saturday, and they want to see the best teams play, but they also want to see them playing champions, a week later.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the Super League, which is what that discussion with Ross was all about, it bothers me a lot because, again, it sort of eliminates such a large part of the game and so many clubs from being even capable of participating. I mean, at least when you talk about the Champions League, yeah, we know that Shakhtar Donetsk is not going to win the Champions League, but at least they can be in the Champions League. And to a lesser extent, there are clubs like Leicester who can jump up into the Champions League. Leicester's not going to be included in a European Super League, so you have essentially eliminated the possibility. And I know this is something that we can't do here, but I enjoy that element of European football. It's It's kind of
I completely agree with you. I mean, number one, I think it'll never really work because of the scheduling culture they have. The second thing that makes it really kind of unfair, if you look at history, I mean, pretend it's 2016 kind of capabilities, but it's 1976. Manchester United was a terrible team. Leeds United was good. Who would have been in that Super League?
Oh yeah, no, it's
versus,
a snapshot. It's a window in time situation. I mean, but this is the Premier League in 1992 to a certain extent. The clubs that benefited from that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a matter of who's good and who's super at that exact moment, because you're setting yourself up to have locked this thing in for the next at least 30 years, you imagine. And that eliminates the possibility of a club getting back to that level or getting to that level. I mean, again, a club like Spurs is incredibly fascinating in that scenario because they're not on the level of Arsenal or Manchester United or Chelsea or Man City, and yet they are still probably bigger than some of the clubs that would get in from around Europe, if you know what I mean. It's a very strange situation.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is, I mean, the Spurs get couple of more players, and everyone needs a couple more players in every sport. But if they got a couple more players and maybe one more level up of a coach because they could compete at that European Super League level, maybe a little bit. I mean, who knows what kind of team that becomes? Does that become a winner? No, but does that become kind of an English Atleti? I mean, I mean, the truth is that's the model going forward. Is it's insane to try to spend billions to try to be Bayern. It's smarter to spend smart, and I don't like calling it Moneyball because I really don't think it's Moneyball. It's kind of like a whole different model. It's like kind of the anti-Moneyball, really, in a lot of ways. It's kind of old school good coaching and really smart kind of player selection within a system, which really isn't Moneyball.
No, there is. I know this is going to sound weird, but I think, Aaron, that the success for a club like Leicester, for example, and we've seen some quote-unquote smaller clubs pop up and do things in Spain and Germany and even in France. Sometimes I think that distracts us from the truth, which is that money and club size and the clout that certainly the amount of debt you can take on if you're a Manchester United or a City or anybody certainly could if they wanted to, means that we've already the hierarchy of the top echelon is already set. I mean, Leicester may finish in a top 4 spot. They may even win the league this year, but that doesn't mean that there's been a fundamental shift, and it doesn't mean that English football or European football in the general is more egalitarian and fair all of a sudden. It just means that there's an adjustment period happening because we already know who the clubs are that can dominate the money game, and 9 times out of 10, 85 seasons out of 100, that's going to end up with one of those teams being champion.
I read this great report on, and it talks about basically the next 10 years, kind of the new metric. Forget about winning. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but the new metric is the $1 billion a year revenue club, which, when you think about what that actually means, I mean, let's call it the sporting plus the market power behind $1 billion. And we know who those clubs are going to be. This is what's interesting about Man City. Man City is basically saying we're going to be one of those clubs, which, if someone said that 8 years ago or 10 years ago, they would have laughed at you. So what's going to be fascinating is when you have kind of a template of a PSG or Man City, a team that there's no way 10 years ago anyone would have said would have been $1 billion a year club within 20 years. That means at some point, just the same way as sports here got really taken over by large business interests, not the local car dealer kind of, sub-mafia guy here, but real big corporation type businesses, private equity companies. I can see that start happening in Europe where people go to a logical kind of, underperforming club, a Marseille, even though they're a train wreck, but let's say they get reformed somehow. Or I'll pick one that makes no sense. You take Frankfurt or Berlin. I mean, those are massive cities. And the idea that they don't have just awesome football clubs.
Right.
To me, those are ripe for what we think deep pockets are. I mean, real deep pockets, billions say on a $1 billion a year business platform, which happens to be a soccer club, which could really at that point is just an entertainment company. And I really see that that's going to be very interesting. And when that happens, because they need it to happen, because then it becomes really about, this is like American Idol soccer at that point, right? I mean, it just becomes this kind of, the best 8-10 clubs just, do their own thing while they happen to do all these other cute things on the side called play and league.
It's the stratification of soccer that I think is inevitable. With Ross several times, it changes the complexion of the game so dramatically. And I know, look, we have been moving in this direction. The Premier League was one step in this direction. TV money and its influence has obviously made a big difference in how these clubs think about their future. And again, the more you said it. I mean, and this. Look, the people who want to romanticize the game, I understand, but you can't put the genie back in the bottle. These as it goes along, like you said, the private equity firms, the oil interests, these ultra rich families that take control. What are they going to want to do? I mean, they're business people. They made their money by making smart business decisions, and if you are in a position to lock your team in to a stratum that will always maintain their top level status, you're going to do that if you can. You're going to choose to do that, and there may not be anything anybody else can do, and there may not be enough. I mean, this is talking about Aaron. I'm gonna let you go because this is gonna get real deep, and I want to go down this rabbit hole yet. But this is why the issue of fan representation in the governing bodies of the World Game is a good idea, even if I'm not sure it's ever going to be practical. Because there needs to be some interest pushing back against the continued, what's the word? Commodization. That's not even how you say that. I can't remember. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Turning these clubs into, again, commodities, which are then inured against potential loss because you're finishing 10th in the Premier League. Manchester United is going to protect themselves against finishing 10th in the Premier League by joining the Super League. PSG, Bayern Munich, a couple of Italian squads, Juve certainly in that mix. Real Madrid, Barcelona. These teams they're going to choose. They're going to opt in on protecting themselves and going for the big money. The more elite you make yourself, the more money there is to be had. The Champions League is the biggest driver of revenue in world football, period, bar none, end of story, for clubs. So if they have an opportunity to ensure that there's not only is there going to be a Champions League every year, but we're going to be playing the big games against the big clubs every single year. And we're not going to have to go through all these rounds of games against these little squads. We can make our own league. And now look, instead of a tournament, we can do it as a league and guarantee, home and home, Barcelona, Real Madrid, against Manchester United, Chelsea every single year, against PSG, against Bayern Munich every single year. The people's eyes fill up with dollar signs. Greg in Memphis, you're on the air.
Hi, Jason. How are you doing this morning?
I am in the game. It's crazy, Greg. What do you got for me?
Okay. So I wanted to talk about American soccer youth development.
Oh, you do you? Okay, Greg.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's fix the problem right here, you and me.
I'm a podcast listener, so I'm still on Monday as far as soccer news is concerned, so pardon me if I'm not on the latest topic.
Okay.
But, correct me if I'm this logic, and maybe I'm trying to distill this down too hard to one solution. But for me, it comes down in the bizarre world of DPs and TAM.
Okay.
I have 3 boys myself, and they play soccer, and we have, talked about their future in soccer in the past. And I've got one playing college soccer, and I've got one in club soccer and high school soccer right now. And at some point, I've made a point to tell them, you understand that it doesn't matter how good you are at soccer, it's not a career. There's no future in it. And they say, yeah, I know. The fact of the matter is, until there is a viable profession for someone going through school, there's never going to be significant scholarship money. And if there's not significant scholarship money, and if there's not an end point to it, then the only reason to encourage your son to play soccer would be just for the love of the game. And that's not a good enough. Go ahead.
I'm getting down to the end of the show, Greg. I really don't want to cut you off, and this is good discussion. If you have a SiriusXM subscription, you should call me up over at SiriusXM because we can have a longer discussion about it. What you're telling me is that there is not enough of an example at the professional level of players making enough money and being, the example is not strong enough there. Is that what you're saying?
Well, if I'm evaluating careers, going into soccer is a really poor choice. The big market is in Europe, and there's a visa issue with playing in Europe. In American soccer, it's a short career.
I'm not sure that
pay very well unless you're one of the chosen few.
I'm not sure that you can. I understand what you're saying. I'm not so sure that this is as important to development of players as some people make it out. I'm not saying that there isn't something to be said for players sticking with a sport because there's a future in it and a career in it and money in it. Absolutely, there is something to that. But I think that the interest in a game and the decision to become if you want to become a professional athlete, that the genesis of that dream doesn't happen because of money. It happens because of love of the game, as you said, wanting to be, wanting to hit the home run, score the touchdown, score the goal, that kind of thing, in the big moment.
I know, but your parents have to nurture that.
Sure they do. But
if your parents cut that desire off at an early age,
no, of course,
because there's no scholarship money, and they'd rather you play the French horn because there's scholarship money there, then that has a big impact on how many players go that far.
There is scholarship, Greg. I am sorry, I have to run, man. I do appreciate the call.
There's not scholarship money.
There's some scholarship money. No, there's not. It's not football scholarship money. But again, the structure of soccer and football is very different. There is big money to be made at the college football level, hence the scholarship money. College soccer is never going to be a big money maker. So there's no scholarship money. I don't think that that's a driver of development. Most people will tell you that in part because of that, we have to find a different way to develop players, and maybe also allow them the chance to go and get a college education. All right, it looks like we have one more person trying to get in. I'm sorry, I really am out of time here on a Friday. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks to Ross Dunbar for a fantastic discussion about German football. Make sure you go back and listen to that if you missed it. Callers, you're all brilliant people. We'll move over to SiriusXM FC, where you can continue to listen to Soccer Morning. Remember, no more World Soccer Talk for us. Again, we thank those guys for their support. We'll move over to backheel.com and see you there on Monday. Later.